Oh my God. Okay. All right. So welcome everybody that's watching like live now. Welcome to this like YouTube event. Um, this event is called the DAO, Cypherpunk Dream. And in this, in the next keynote, in the next, we'll be talking about, this new thing called the DAO, which is kind of like very, very new, and it's part of like the Ethereum blockchain. I was just having a few problems before the broadcast. I think we have a few live viewers right now. Let me just start with the presentation right here. We're going to start with the screen share. So before we start, I would like to show you guys, the beginning of the presentation. So the presentation called the DAO, Cypherpunk Dream. You are now on a live hangout with JJ Campuzano. This is me. I'm going to be your host for the night. So first of all, thank you for being here. It really means a lot that you are spending some time to know much, to know more about this new technology. So, like I said, the presentation is divided into four different sections. In the first section, it's called the cypherpunk culture. In this section, we're going to talk a little bit about the origins, of the blockchain. I think this part is really, really interesting because we'll get to talk a little bit more about the how did the blockchain came to be. What's the blockchain? How did it come to be with the advancements in technology, and why the blockchain and Bitcoin and Ethereum? It's really not a new thing. They've been in the works for the past 25 years, I would say. So we're gonna go back in time a little bit, talk about the cypherpunk culture, which is one of the fundamentals of the Bitcoin and Ethereum. And it's changing the world so much that I think it's worthwhile to, do a little recap, about the cypherpunk. What is it? Where does this Bitcoin and Ethereum inventions came to be? On the second part, we're going to talk about the evolution of the blockchain. So first, we'll start with with Bitcoin, which is the first blockchain that we know of. And then we're going to talk about the evolution, how it came to be, how Ethereum represents an evolution in that aspect. Why the technology it's different. Why is it like more sophisticated? Why is it more advanced than Bitcoins? And where are we heading? In the part number 3, we're going to talk about the smart contracts, which is really, really exciting, because in this part, we're going to talk about this, which is like the product of Ethereum. This is like the incarnation of Ethereum, the smart contracts. But why are they important? On the part number 1, we're going to talk about like the fundamentals, of economy, and why contracts are so like important in our society, and why smart contracts represent an evolution, in this, technology, contract technology. And finally, the DAO, putting it all together, that's where it all comes to realization, I would like to mention that the DAO has been first written about in the Ethereum white paper, which is the first definition that we have of DAO. Page number 23 of the Ethereum white paper talks specifically about, the DAO and how does it work, how do they envision, seeing the DAO coming to life. So we're going to talk about that on the part number 4. So anyway, let's get started. Part number 1, cypherpunk culture. What is it? What is the cypherpunk culture? Why are we even talking about it? The philosophical fundamentals of the cypherpunk culture, they're really, really relevant because it tells us about the philosophy behind, like Bitcoin and Ethereum and this whole revolution. Why did it come to be? What's the philosophical motivation behind the founders, of the cypherpunk culture? What is it? What are we basing our, societal implications of, like the blockchain? How do we see society in 5 years from now, 10 years from now? I think that's really, really important. So let me start with this. Where on the left side, you're going to see a picture of Ayn Rand, and she's a writer, just so you know, Ayn Rand. And she wrote this book called Atlas Shrugged. And it's a pretty good book. I'm reading it right now, actually, like the past few days. And to be honest, I haven't finished it. It's a pretty extensive book. But in it, she writes something about breaking away from corrupt institutions, and I think that's probably the fundamental part of Atlas Shrugged. She wrote in 1955 about the fact of creating, a place called Galt's Gulch, which is where you can break away from government and corrupt institutions. So Ayn Rand, big philosophical fundamental of cypherpunk. On the right side, you're going to see a picture of Timothy C. May. He's considered as the founder of the cypherpunk culture. I'm going to put links to it at the end of the presentation, so you know more, or if you would like to read more about these people. So Timothy C. May, he's considered the founder of the cypherpunk culture in 1988. So just think about it, I'm talking about 1955 on one side, and I'm talking about 1988 on the other. So that will give you an idea of like how long has it take, for Bitcoin and Ethereum to come to be. This is another continuation of that cypherpunks. What do we believe? What's the basics of the cypherpunk culture? Cypherpunk culture, it talks about Galt's Gulch, like that theoretical or that utopia that Ayn Rand describes, but in cyberspace, just the digital realm, and protect yourself with cryptography. So the cypherpunks, we talk about, like the cryptography, it's your shield, that's how you fight back, that's your armor, that's cryptography. So the cypherpunk culture talks about this, that cyberspace is where you protect yourself with this armor, and it's pretty cool, so that's part of the cypherpunk culture, just so you guys know. But here it comes, like this analysis. We have this guy, Friedrich August von Hayek. A lot of people just know him as F.A. Hayek. He's an economist. Just so you know, this guy is a Nobel Prize winner in economics. I think he was given the Nobel Prize in, I'm not really sure like the year, but basically what he says is that, okay, not so fast. It all sounds very good in theory, but he comes to the realization that society as we know it, or industrial society or computerized society, is highly evolved. Basically, his main thesis is that society basically it's composed of property, money, and much more than that. But these are the three most important aspects of society. If you think about it, when you enter law school, you're going to start to study contract law, the first year of law, and property law. That's one of the first aspects that you enter when you start to study, today's law. How we base most of our interactions are based on contracts. If you think about it, like the fact that you go to work every day, you have a contract with a company, that in that contract is your salary, your vacation days, imagine, your benefits and whatnot. So contracts, they play a very, very important role, in our society. When you purchase something, it's based on a contract. Property as well. Property is very, very evolved right now. You can do many things with property, like put it as a collateral and all of that. But all of this requires security, like all of this, like doing all of that. Security in a sense that is the government that provides, like law enforcement and courthouses, and all of this requires a lot of security, right? So one of the main mantras of the cypherpunk culture, it's to apply computer science to minimize vulnerability to strangers. So that's a very important thing, because if you apply, just science, just pure math, you don't want to be vulnerable to a stranger. Let's say you want to do a cash transaction. You use your vulnerability to strangers is very it's very high. Like you're carrying cash. So the origins of the cypherpunk culture is how do we apply that to the digital realm? How do you minimize your vulnerability to strangers? How do you know that when you put your credit card information or your data on the internet, you're not going to get hacked? So that's part of the origins of the cypherpunk culture. How do you protect yourself? How do you reduce that? How do you have more privacy? And also, there's some very, very ambitious problems. One of the most ambitious problems, of course, is how to privatize money. And that's always been a very heated topic, if you will, because private money, it's important, like the fact that government has a monopoly on money. It's really significant if you think about it. Just the fact that money creation is in the hands of the government, it's significant because they control the money supply. So one of the cypherpunk culture mantras is how to make money that's truly private. Another one is to non-violently enforce property and contracts. And let me emphasize the non-violently part, because non-violently means that you're not gonna, in today's world, we have police force and you have law enforcement and you have courthouses to enforce your contract, right? If somebody breaks a contract with you, you have a legal right to sue that person. But that's also, it's very costly, So the cypherpunk culture, one of the main mantras is how to reduce all that, how to non-violently enforce property and contracts. And from all that, it came to be the creation of something that we call smart contracts, blockchains, and cryptocurrencies, which is really significant, So this is the ambitious problems that, the cypherpunk culture wants to address. Another part that I want to get on here is that there's been Bitcoin precursors. There's been a history, if you will, of kind of like subjects, kind of like papers, white papers, or attempts, if you will, to come up with this private money goal that we've been trying to achieve, since, in the 80s. So in the first part, you have something called DigiCash, from 1983, David Chalmers. He's also a cryptographer, a scientist, and he's got a 1981 paper, which is really, really, interesting. It's called Untraceable Electronic Mail, Return Addresses, and Digital Pseudonyms. In that, he basically lays down the foundation of how to resolve the problem of identity, on the digital cyberspace. So we have a precursor of Bitcoin in 1983. In 1996, we have another attempt called eGold, and it's from this company called Gold and Silver Reserved. And you have a small reference or something that you can read upon, like what was eGold? It was a digital gold currency, basically operated by this company, that allowed users to open an account in their website denominated in grams of gold or other precious metals, and the ability to make instant transfer of value, we call it, or called spends, to other Eagle accounts. So basically, there you have it. This is an attempt to come up with money that was based on gold, but whatever happened to it, you may ask, you know? So basically, the government took it away. So that's what happened with eGold. Basically, most of the attempts at producing private money have been squashed, you know, by the government, which really doesn't. It makes a lot of sense because, you know, they don't want any competition in the money supply. So as I said, there's been attempts, you know, at creating, you know, private money and, you know, creating or resolving these problems, which is non-violently enforced property and contracts. But whatever the cypherpunks fail, they could not prevent this. You know, this is the slide that I want to show you that basically it shows today's problem, which is a centralization problem. This is it. This is what's happening right now. We have a total centralization problem where we give the security aspect of most of our actions online, they're centralized. For example, let me just give you a very, very good example. When you use your credit card, one of the things that we have, it's something called trusted authorities, like VeriSign. VeriSign, just so you know, it's a company that all they do is to provide signature certificates, basically, you know. So all they do is basically performing security, you know, like transactions and all of that, but that's not really what we consider security. There's no such thing as a trusted third party, because once you have a centralization problem, it's just very, very hard to solve, you know, like non-violently enforced property and contracts. So now we have blockchains and cryptocurrencies that are trying to solve the centralization problem, but this is the second part. So this is, you know, the last of part number one, cypherpunk culture. We're gonna start with the second part. If you have any questions so far, I'm gonna check on YouTube just to see if there's any questions so far and see if I can address any. I just check here. We have 10 viewers so far live, so hello everyone. Let's see, I hope I'm doing the screen share right now. I hope you guys can see it. The screen share, that's what I've been trying to do before. The DAO, slide number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So we're gonna start with part number 2, evolution of the blockchain. This is the part where I'm gonna start to talk about what, as far as Bitcoin came to be, which we all know was invented in 2009, and then Ethereum, which came to life in 2013, and then the blockchain came live in 2015. I mean, how have we evolved in terms of like the blockchain? You know, in the blockchain, we know that trusted exchangers are security holes, and this is the part that I was talking about before. That when you trust a complete a stranger company, you know, that just does it. It's not security. You know, let's say when you use your credit card and you trust your bank and you trust this company called VeriSign, or you have this third-party trust, you know, bodies, is just not what we consider like a good security protocol. So the mantra of the blockchain is to minimize those trust assumptions. You know, like, so with the blockchain, you don't have to trust the other people. You don't have like the transaction is the trust, you know, it either happens or it doesn't. So with the blockchain, one of the objectives of this is to minimize, you know, those trust assumptions that we've been doing, you know, the past 20 years. So that's That's one of the things that the blockchain gives us. Another thing that I really want to emphasize is that centralization, it's very, very, very insecure. In this slide, I have one guy. His name is Mark Karpeles. He's on the top left. And, we all know, if you have been around Bitcoin, he's the CEO of Mt. Gox. And it's a company that basically took away a lot of people's money, and it was centralized. It was just a company doing a lot of Bitcoin trading back in the day. And it was just not very safe, because he ended up shutting down the company and taking about $450 million down with it. So that's a very good example of why centralization is very insecure. On the next one, we have the radio tower, which talks about how centralization, like 100 years ago, was very, very centralized. The radio technology was centralized. We have another example of Scientific American, that's a steam press, and how the information that flew in the past, like 100 years ago, it was very centralized, because only newspapers that had, this steam press that were so big had, the opportunity to produce this information. And just to make a stronger point, on the right side, you have Joseph Stalin. So basically, when the communism came to power with Stalin, all he had to do is just take power of a very few information center points. You know what I mean? So Stalin only had to take power of the mass media, like newspapers, radio stations, and soldiers. And with that, he took control of an entire country. That's how it works. That's what history tells us. Centralization of power is also very, very insecure. So you can tell what happened with Stalin's communism in the history books, and it wasn't pretty. Honestly, a lot of people died. So it's really, really, I guess, not funny. When you talk about that, how insecure that can be. Another thing that we have is that physical wealth, is not very secure. And why do I say that? On the right side, you have Aztec gold, right? So the Aztecs, what they did is basically they took away the gold from the surrounding tribes, and if they didn't pay the gold, they just obliterate they would kill everybody. The Aztecs just centralized all the gold in Tenochtitlan, which is like the Aztec city, and they had all the gold in there. And then on the right side, you have the conquistador, Hernan Cortez, and he came and saw and conquered and took away all the gold from the Aztecs. So you see how physical wealth, they all can always be taken from you, physical wealth. Just to continue with this point is that on this slide, I'm showing the U-2 boats, the German boats. And one of the things that the history books do not tell you very much is that these U-boats, they were sinking British ships during World War II so bad, and they were sinking so much gold that you can tell how physical wealth is not very secure. I mean, you have to transport gold or anything that represents value. You're always going to have a certain risk. Physical wealth, again, not very secure. Franklin Roosevelt, right in the middle, he confiscated all of the gold from the American people in 1931. And you can go and check the history books, because that's exactly what happened. He made it a crime punishable, I think, by up to 10 years in jail if you would not sell the gold back to the US government. So there you go. Another example of why physical wealth is not very, very secure. And the final example, try to travel with gold or anything of value in today's society, you're not gonna get very far, So this is an X-ray. Anytime you go through an airport or any kind of like screening, boom, there you go. You're gonna get confiscated, and you're gonna realize why the physical wealth is just not secure at all. So this is how we see the evolution of the blockchain. You know, we are going for a decentralization using computer science, which is much more automated and secure than traditional security. So I've been trying to give you a background of, you know, how physical wealth has been performing, you know, in the past, you know, 1,000 years. And now this is another slide that shows you the evolution of networks. You know, how do we see the evolution of centralized technologies? On one side, you have the hub and spoke model, which is today's technology. If you think about it, you have Google. Every time you do a search, you like jump into Google servers. You do a search, but it's based on their servers. It's centralized. You know, they can probably be spread all over the world, but Google's still a centralized company. Facebook, same thing. You know, you log into Facebook, you know, you log into their servers, and it's still, you know, it's a centralized technology. Amazon, Apple, same thing. And right in the middle, you have a different model, which is a decentralized peer-to-peer model. That's how we call it. On this certain type of networks, you have different examples. You probably remember Napster from back in 2000, I think. And that's one of the first examples of what a peer-to-peer network, you know, can do. You know, decentralizing file sharing, and people started to trade music, and you know the whole story. G-Nutella, it's another type of network like that. So that's a decentralized P2P model, very resilient. You know, it took like years to take down, you know, Napster and Nutella, and now you have the distributed peer-to-peer model. This is very solid. This is, you know, Bitcoin, BitTorrent, Ethereum. This is very different because this has no single point of failure. So that's very, very important. Go for the one on the left. You're gonna see that if you take down Google, Facebook, Amazon, or Apple right at the center, you don't have a network anymore. That's a point of failure. You know, if Google goes down, everything goes down. On the right side, on the distributed P2P model, you don't have anything that's centralized. You're gonna see distributed. You're gonna see how every node represents just like a point, you know, in the network, but none of them represents like decentralized resource model that we see. So that's how the blockchain has, you know, evolved. That's how we see, you know, this technology evolving even more. And here's one of the problems of centralization. This insecurity, you know, that centralization model gives you, of course, it's going to drive up like costs. You know, like for example, every time somebody commits like, you know, credit card fraud, or there's a hack, or there's like something where a bank gets attacked, who's going to pay for those costs? It's not the banks, you know. So trust me, it's us. We pay for that. You know, we pay for that in fees and bank statements and financing charges. But here's one of the things. I put a headline of 2 different articles. One is actually very, very recent. The second one, the one that you see that says now it's 3. Ecuador bank hacked via SWIFT. That's also very, very significant because that happened 3 days ago, and cyber criminals hacked into SWIFT, which is like a settlement platform. It's like a payment network for banks. So just like we pay each other, you know, using banks use another network on top of it called SWIFT. But guess what? SWIFT is not very secure. SWIFT represents, you know, like I said, a single point of failure, and it's just, you know, represents all technology. So of course, you know, this insecurity gets you stuck inside national silos. So that's how you get bunkers. You know, you get like these bank servers are stuck behind, you know, foots of steel and concrete. You know. So this is, you know, next slide. Biggest reason traditional finance is stuck inside national silos is because it depends on governments for its security. And that's also very, very significant. because banks, they depend on police, for its security. They depend on law enforcement. I put this subtract from the article that says something that I thought it was super funny. The Bangladesh Central Bank had no firewall and was using a second-hand $10 network router. I think that it's a $10 network router when it was hacked earlier in April 2016. So that gives you, like a sense of, that's a central bank, just so you know. That's not just a regular bank like Frost Bank or a branch like Chase around the corner. This is a country that is running on that bank. So you can't even imagine like the type of security that dries up, like in this kind of technology. So we need to evolve. We're starting to see how blockchain really represents, like a total evolution of that. And for that, I want to give you this, next graphic. This will show you why Ethereum and Bitcoin represent an advance over centralization. Why? Okay, let me explain to you why. Diversity. Why do I say diversity? You're going to see a world map on this slide, and you're going to see a bunch of nodes, like from yesterday. This is from May 24th. And you're going to see like all the blue and dark blue spots and the red spots, how they're distributed all over the world. So you're going to see maybe something in the United States, you have 1,876 nodes, but you're going to see a lot of like Germany, United Kingdom, Canada, Netherlands. There's a few in Singapore and Australia. So you have independent nodes. So diversity gives you independence. That's why this slide it's designed like that. Diversity gives you independence because I would like to think that the nodes in Singapore and Vietnam are really independent. They're non-malicious. They're you have some in South America. You see Brazil actually pretty active. And you have a less likely possibility of collusion. You know what I mean? You have a very, very insignificant possibility of these nodes like colluding with each other because they're in entirely different parts of the world. And that's why Bitcoin and Ethereum in this case, I'm showing you the Ethereum node distribution. It's very secure, it's very diverse. You have a node in Singapore, you have tons of nodes here in the US, tons of nodes in the Russian Federation. You have 316 nodes in Russia. You have another 300 nodes in Canada, 278 nodes in the Netherlands. So it gives you an idea, like where I'm heading with this. It's a lot of diversity, like the whole world is kind of participating in this, Ethereum project. So that's the evolution of the blockchain. This is part 2. Let's go on with part 3, smart contracts, blockchain killers app. This is where we're going to study why smart contracts are important. They're important because that's what the blockchain gives you. Besides giving you security, like we talk, it gives you security, it gives you less dependency on the strangers. This is where we get to the juicy part. Smart contracts is actually like a very, very cool thing because like we talked about before, according to these Nobel Prize economists, contracts are at the heart of our society. So that's why smart contracts, I'm really excited to show you what we can do with the smart contracts. But first, a definition. What's a smart contract? A smart contracts, very simple. Definition number 1, acts like a contract in terms of performance, verification. You can verify that the contract has been validated or has, it's performing. And it's the same thing. It's performed between 2 parties, like 2 persons or 1 party and the blockchain, which is also very important. If you do a contract between you and the Ethereum blockchain, that can also happen, and that's also a definition of a smart contract. Another definition, long-lived Ethereum process, contracts or dApps, or decentralized app. What does that mean? it means that a contract can be, just like we know, a contract between two people, but it could also be something that resides on the blockchain, on the Ethereum blockchain. You can think of the definition for number 2 like a little robot, like you can think of it like a robot that is kind of dormant on the Ethereum blockchain and it lives there. You just choose the Ethereum blockchain as its home, and anytime you want to wake him up, kind of, I'm going to put that in quotes, wake him up, you can send, like some action, like send some money to it, like Ether or do something in code that is going to make the smart contract like wake up, and I'm going to put that on quotes as well. So that's the definition number 2. That's a long-lived Ethereum process. What can we do with this? This is something very, very cool. We're going to talk about smart property and Ethereum. One of the things that I want to show you is this new thing called a proplet. A proplet they were invented by a guy named Nick Szabo, who he's a computer scientist. And proplets, what do they do? It's a little device, like you can think of a proplet inside a car key, for example. Proplets, what they do is look to the blockchain to tell them what keys can tell them to do what. So, for example, you buy a car, and they give you, the keys, and it's a smart property. The keys are, embedded with cryptographic thingies inside, whatever. And you don't pay for the car. You're like, you know what? I'm just gonna stop paying my monthly, my monthly finance charge. What happens? This is the application right there. Auto repo collateral. They could be invalidated. That car can literally, your key can be rendered invalid if you don't pay, and the car can be totally inaccessible remotely, which is pretty cool. So this is one application. Almost any valuable property that can be controlled digitally. So you can do basically anything with it. If you buy a computer, hey, let me finance the computer, but if you don't pay for it, then the computer can be rendered useless. So this is a very cool thing, this is smart property. The Ethereum blockchain gives you a chance to do all this, to implement it. We're gonna see the first examples of this coming up pretty soon, with the DAO. So this is just like a little teaser of what's, how does it work, so you know more. Smart contracts. This is also very, very, very important. And the rise of Lex cryptographia. Lex cryptographia, it's a term that I've been using, before. Lex cryptographia, what does it mean? It means cryptographic law. That's where the actual terms, the Latin terms comes to be. So this is actually part, I'm going to put that in my book, actually. I'm writing a book about blockchain and all that stuff. So I'm going to put this little diagram right here. The first column, cognitive implementation. So on that column, you're going to see, like what are the logic grounds based on the security, like that's the implementation. The column in the middle, it's the wet code. That's what we know as law. That's wet code. That's our brains. We in terms of Ethereum, we refer to our brains as wet code, and dry code as that's code law. That's the law that governs the DAO and Ethereum and all that. So let's get on. What are the logic grounds? The wet law, it's based on subjective minds and analogy. That's how we interpret law. Like that's how lawyers, and that's what courthouses, that's how we do law these days. Dry code, it's just not based on that. It's not so based on analogies and subjective minds. It's based on Boolean logic and bits. Very simple. The security in wet code is based on contempt, like contempt of like authority, and imprisonment, of course. You can be taken away for some time. The dry code, the security is based on replication and cryptography. Replication, it's based on the fact that the blockchain, it's replicated everywhere, so that's the security of it. You cannot just shut down that type of security. The predictability on a wet code is very flexible. you know, the interpretations gives you many results. On dry code, you have a very rigid, you know, predictability, which is very desirable, like many times. The maturity of each case highly evolve on the terms of law, because we've been doing this type of law for the last 8,000 years since the Sumerian culture came to be. So we have 8,000 years of history in wet code, and in dry code we have a very few experiences. So we call it the larva stage, you know, very pre-Cambric, but we're going to see a Cambric explosion very soon. Anyway, the area where those things are supposed to reside. On wet code, you have, of course, jurisdictional silos. So you have the courthouses, you have, you know, those places where law is enforced, you know. And the dry code, of course, it's completely different. It resides on the blockchain, and it's independent from financial and political institutions and seamless operation across borders. The cost on lawsuits, you know, like I mentioned before, they're really expensive. So the cost on wet code, as far as we know, it's expensive. Dry code, on the other side, it's extremely low, because the code is the enforcement. So the cost to make this kind of security be validated is a lot less, which is like really cool. So this is the part where I talk about smart contracts. You know, we cover, you know, some of it. If you have any questions about smart contracts, we are about to enter the part that I guess a lot of people are very interested, which is the DAO. So, and this one, we're going to start to get to the juicy part, because this has generated so like much interest. Basically, the last three parts, they have been leading to this, because we have talked about the fundamentals of, you know, the culture. We have talked about the evolution of the blockchain. We talk about smart contracts, and then this is where it comes to life. Just so you know, the DAO was first, you know, I think I said that in the beginning, page number 23 of the Ethereum white paper. There's a definition of a DAO. But DAO, like the financial technology new paradigm, you know, what is it? What is the DAO? The DAO stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization, you know, very simple. But it has the following characteristics. Like we talk about, it resides completely in the Ethereum blockchain. It is a collection of the smart contracts ruled by global code instructions. So just to explain that further, I'm gonna go for the definition number 2 of a smart contract right here. So you're gonna see like the definition number 2 is the long-lived Ethereum process. So that's exactly what the DAO is. It resides completely in the Ethereum blockchain, and it's kind of like this robot, you know, that I told you about. It's like this thing that just lives there. The DAO invests in projects just like a traditional Wall Street hedge fund. So right now, today, you have a traditional Wall Street hedge fund, and you can think of a hedge fund like a pool of money. You know, there's a lot of people that have money, and let's say, you know, you have $1 million, and you say, hey, you know, I want to put my money to work. One of the best ways to do so is to put your money on a hedge fund, because what a hedge fund does is amplifies the power of your money. So you put $1 million and you have maybe 200 other people and come up with $200 million, and you can do very cool projects like building a bridge or building a skyscraper, and everybody makes a lot of money and everybody's happy. So that's exactly what it is, the DAO. You can think of it like the equivalent of a Wall Street hedge fund. Another definition, the contractors are the persons in charge of building physical things so the DAO makes a profit. I'm going to explain a little bit more on the next slide, who the contractors are. And finally, the investors, are the people that own DAO tokens and committed their funds to a particular project. So the investors are people like you and me, it's the people that own those tokens, and you say, okay, I'm inside this hedge fund, you know, like what do I do? Well, you can commit those tokens to a particular project that you really think it's going to be like very successful. So let's delve into that a little more. The DAO, how does it work? You know, let's talk about that. The phase number one is the creation phase. This is where, and we're still in it, just so you know, we're still in phase number one out of 3. You know, that's how I define them. So in phase number one, it's about to end in about 2 or 3 days. This is the crowdfunding phase. This is the only phase where you can have token creation. What does that mean? Tokens, they will not be created after this phase. This is very, very particular and one of the most important aspects of the phase number one, because once we reach the finalization of phase number one, the tokens, they definitely get that number that we're going to reach. They cannot never be created again. So that's why it makes phase one very, very significant, because you're basically creating the tokens as you deposit Ether. Let's say you send 1 Ether right now to the DAO address. You're literally creating 50 tokens that did not exist before. And that can only happen in phase number one, okay? Phase number two, development phase. That's going to start on May 29th. You know, that's where we start to like see about the investment in those projects. You know, we're going to start to see, hey, you know, what's out there. You know, I have my money in the DAO, and what's going to happen? You know, what's the next step? This is the development phase. This is where money is going to get really committed to those projects, and then we're going to see if they, you know, take off or not. So that's also a very, very interesting phase that can take up to like a month, as far as I know, to commit the funds and getting, you know, all the funds in the voting process. And it's going to be pretty interesting. Phase two, it hasn't come out yet. Like I said, this is just my interpretation of what's about to happen. But of course, the investment in project is a sure thing, and token trading. That's where we're going to start to see the exchanges taking the, you know, the token, and we're going to start to see, you know, Kraken, Poloniex, Gatecoin, and just start to trade the token. So that's going to be pretty interesting, because that's when you can just make money based off pure speculation, you know, like what people are willing to pay for this kind of project. And then phase number three, you know, that's when you, like, the DAO start to like really make stuff, you know, physical stuff, and the projects start delivering dividends. You know, that's when you start to see, you know, the benefits of being at the DAO, and, you know, so this is going to be the juicy part. That's when you see your money working truly, you know, like a hedge fund type investor. So that's how those 3 phases are divided in. If you have any questions about phase number 1, 2, 3, make sure to you can address them to me. So let's start with the next slide. The DAO. This is how it basically how the money flows. So in the middle, you have the DAO, like, you know, you're gonna see the collection of smart contracts governed by dry law, you know, code law, that like we talked about in a few slides back. And on the top side, you have the investors and curators. So the investors are, you know, like people like you and me, you know, so the investors are the token owners that commit funds to a project. We talk about it. Curators, we haven't talked about them. Who are they? The curators are the programmers in charge of verifying and whitelisting projects. The curators, they fulfill a very, very important role. They check that the contractors, they check that the proposals are exactly what they say that's going to be on the code. And they also check the identity of the contractors based on, you know, like cryptography and multi-sig, like signatures. So the curators on the right side, they are also a very, very important role. So the DAO basically gets the money, and then below you have the contractors, which submit proposals to the DAO and build physical things. So this is kind of like a broad a scheme, or like a broad diagram of how the DAO would work, and then it gives you a broad idea of how the money is going to flow. You see yourself in the investor side, and the curators are the programmers. So you have the DAO right in the middle, and then the contractors, like build things. So that's how it works. And basically on the last slide, I'm just taking, like basically some of the fundamentals and philosophy that I talk about, and let me just read them before we finish all this. An individualist is a man who says, I will not run anyone's life, nor let anyone run mine. I will not rule, not be ruled. I will not be a master, not a slave. I will not sacrifice myself to anyone, nor sacrifice anyone to myself. That's Ayn Rand. I just kind of like wanted to read that. And finally, this other phrase that says, throughout the centuries, there were men who took first steps down new roads armed with nothing but their own vision. And that's also something that I wanted to share with you guys, because it's part of the, the philosophy that I've been involved in, with this cypherpunk culture. And I really feel that, on Ethereum, we're also like doing we're exploring new roads, and we have like really nothing but our values and our vision and math and cryptography and science, but we're making history, guys. This is very important, and that's why I wanted to share all of this with you. This is really, really cool. And I have a few links that I mentioned in the keynote. I have a link about the cypherpunk right there. Ayn Rand, Timothy May, David Chum, all of the crypto anarchy. Also, I would like for you to read that. The link to the Bangladesh Central Bank article is right there. A few links to my own articles, the Black Swan blockchain theory. It's something that I always mention in my presentations. And another one called Privacy and Freedom in the Cyberspace. That's going to give you a very cool background about privacy and a visual story. And I made it a few months ago. And this is it, thank you very much to the live viewers. I think I have, how many? I think I had like 11, 12 viewers. I have no questions yet on the chat. So I don't know if, I hope nothing happened in the beginning with the streaming. But thank you for being here. All those people that were here, 11, 12 people. I really appreciate your company. This is where I'm supposed to do a QA session, but at this moment, I'm just gonna, like tell you that I really, really appreciate, like, being with me today. I really hope that you guys learn like more about the Ethereum, about the cypherpunk, culture. What is the DAO? This new thing. Like I said, I do this only because I love the technology. I really believe it's going to change, a lot in the way we do things in the future. Just to know that we can do smart contracts. It's also like very significant because you link everything together, and then you realize that property, contracts, and money are the three fundamental pillars of our society, according to Hayek. And if we can do all this on the blockchain, I think we're gonna take this to a very, very interesting level. Just so you know, I'm doing an initiative about artificial intelligence. So if anybody out there is watching and if you have an interest in artificial intelligence and Ethereum and programming, in Solidity or any kind of programming, I could probably, use your talents. So help me out, talk to me. I put my email on the presentation. Send me an email, jcampusano@protonmail.ch. It's an encrypted email based in Switzerland. I would recommend for you to also get your Proton Mail account if you want to do so. And in the meantime, I think that's it. It's been like a whole hour. It's 10 p.m. And thank you, everybody, for being here. If I don't have any more questions on the live chat, I think I'm going to call it off for tonight. And thank you very much. See you on the dark side.